Okay, so slowly but surely, we're going through First Timothy, and we find ourselves in chapter 5. Last week, we couldn't go that far, as we had wanted, but it was all good. It was a lively discussion just on verse 1 of chapter 5. But today, I think I'll promise you, we'll move faster than we did last week. So, just for those who are joining us, we've been looking at First Timothy, very important book. It's one of the pastoral epistles. So, for the pastoral epistles, we have First and Second Timothy, and then we have Titus. And Timothy, we are told, was a young man. Now, when we use a young man, it's relative because in Jewish culture, a young man probably could be between the ages of 20 and 40. In fact, some people even say that if you're under 50, you are still a young man. So it's relative. We don't know what exactly his age was, but relatively speaking, because of the way Paul addresses him, we can presume that he was a young man. And when you're a young man, it doesn't mean that you are not matured when it comes to the things of God. You can have a young man who is 25, but in the things of God, he can be more matured than a man who is 60 or 70. It happens. But whatever it is, an older man has experience. He has, so much to teach. The younger person. So in verse number 1, Paul draws our attention as a local church to how we treat the older man. And we came across the word rebuke. I thought initially rebuke was just an ordinary word, but it's the way it's used there has this idea of don't criticize harshly. Don't criticize harshly. And so if you tie it into the whole verse, verses 1 and 2, it says, encourage the brethren. And this is very important because it's not just there, but before we read from verses 3 to 16, would somebody kindly turn to Galatians 6:2 and then someone else to Proverbs 16:31. And this is going to be our golden text for today. We should have read the first one last week, but we'll read it today. It doesn't matter. Galatians 6:2, Proverbs 16:31. And that would set us on our way for our discussion this morning. So, anybody finds any of them, you can read it for our edification. Galatians 6:2. Yes. Oh, you can even quote it. Wonderful. Yes. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So this is where we are coming from. The New Testament church, is supposed to, let me use it this way. We need to be each other's keeper. Okay? In the local church, you can't be an island. We bear each other's burdens. And that's why we take prayer requests. And if you are an active member, you should be aware of what is happening in the individual lives of members, at least to some extent. You may not know everything, so that you can always be praying for each other. And thankfully, these days, because of technology, when you are in trouble, it's just a matter of texting your brother, your sister. Can you pray with me? Connect. I know there are some people who want to erect barriers. They just don't flow with people. That's fine. But what I know, just by experience, there's going to be a time when you are going to be in trouble. That is our Christian experience. Sometimes you are confused. You just need to talk to somebody. Just text. And sometimes just even doing random text, you'll be amazed how a blessing you can be to somebody. Because at that particular moment in time, that brother or sister might be needing encouragement. So we are encouraged to bear each other up. Apart from that, Paul is speaking to a system where the local church needs to be better organized when it comes to, groups and individuals. So specifically for this chapter, he talks about older men and then widows. And we'll delve into why widows and not widowers. Okay? But widows, and we'll see the categories of widows that he talks about. So that's Galatians 6:2. Will somebody else read this? Proverbs 16:31.
Proverbs 16:31. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life.
Amen. Gray hair is what?
A crown.
A crown of glory. I don't know how many of you have got gray hair here, but gray hair is a crown of glory, and it's gained through what? The second part.
Righteous. Being righteous.
Being righteous. So we're talking about Christians here. It doesn't mean every gray hair. We are talking about Christian gray hair. Christian gray hair. Because for some people, unfortunately, we always assume that as a person grows older, they become wiser. But it doesn't work all the time. For King Solomon, he was wiser in his younger years. But as he grew older, he became, So this is very important because ideally, as we grow in grace, the gray hair becomes a sign of maturity. And, that period of life, what we call retirement, becomes a period of, it provides opportunity for mentoring young people. So you can't say that I'm old, I've retired, I have nothing to do for Christ or the church. You see? So we need to utilize all the opportunities that the church affords us. And they don't say there's nothing that you cannot do. There's nothing you can do. There's always something that you can do. All right? So remember last week, we also set the parameters for our study, that we said that, through Christ's redemptive work, God is trying to recreate, a new generation, the church, who would, fulfill the purpose for which he made man. And so if you are a saved Christian, you are supposed to do better than the world. And we also said that, the world treats old people in a very dismissive way. It's like these days, if you are old, then you are just dismissed. When people are hiring, they hire young men and women. And then older people are just, no. The world, that's the world. In the Church of Christ, it ought to be the other way around. Everybody has a role to play. So let me ask you, just before we read, there are some churches who use business techniques. They say we are focusing on a particular gender, particular group. When I say gender, please, I'm not talking about. A particular group of people. We are targeting people in their 50s to form the core of the local church. Based on our readings and discussions, what do you make of that kind of church plan? People who say, no, I'm focusing on this group of people.
We need to focus on the whole of the church. It bugs me. I see on Facebook someone says, looking for a local church, child's ministry important. And I'm like, it is important that the child's ministry, along with everything else, make sure the word's preached properly, first and foremost, before you start looking into what groups are ministered to.
Any more? What do you think? Right? The church is supposed to be all inclusive. You have older people, younger people, married people, single people, children, everybody. And ideally, opportunity should be provided so that we all hear the gospel. All right? So to try to target a particular group, that is not how to do church. All right? So having said that, I think chapter 1, Paul speaks about the gospel. In fact, he uses the term, the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, defend it, preach it, support it with every effort that you have. Chapter 2, he talks about the conduct of men and women in public worship. And chapter 3, he discusses the qualifications of elders and deacons. We spoke about that. And then in chapter 3, he also talks about the local church is a pillar of truth, the household of God, and then it is the church of God. So, chapter 4, he warns about apostasy. He says some will depart from the faith, okay, and give themselves over to doctrines of demons. So, these are not things we should look forward to into the future. It is happening as we speak. It started right from, in fact, if you go to as far back as the Old Testament, false doctrine, even in the Garden of Eden, it was there. Oh, yes. If you see the devil's reasoning, okay, did God really say that? Okay, man-centered worship. So, Paul discusses all of that. And then in chapter 5, if you know Paul's letters, he now zeroes in on practical things. So he talks about the groups in the church. So, Chris, if you would please read with chapter 5, verses 3 to 16 for us.
Verses 3. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead, even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work, but refused to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows.
Amen. What is it that surprised you about these verses? Did you pick anything up that surprised you? Were you shocked at finding something in there?
I don't think it's surprising. I just think that it's neat. I think that we've lost it. Just that families need to care for each other first. You know, that he's specifically emphasizing that. And I think too often we just, we don't honor our parents in that way.
Yeah. In fact, culturally speaking, I noticed that when people are old, we put them in nursing home. If we have time, we will discuss that. I have a question here I want us to discuss. But real quickly, if you read the text, the instructions look mundane, right? But we pick out 5 different groups of widows. 5 different groups, okay? Let's look at verse 3. And he used the term, honor widows who are truly widows. Okay, the honor there is not like giving a medal or calling them upon a podium, and no. The honor there has this idea of setting something aside. So we're talking about monetary compensation, benevolence. Okay, so widows who are truly widows, here he means those who have set a godly example. And he gives the description there. For such ones, he says, the church must take care of them. The church they must be the church's burden. Okay? The other ones, you will see that he says, no, the church does not have responsibility for such ones. Okay? Right, so that's the first group, those who are truly widows. And then look at verse 4. What is the second group?
The widow who has family.
The widow who has a family. Now, what does he prescribe for that group? Verse 4.
The family care for it, and actually,
Yeah,
that's
yes.
what I did yesterday.
It's okay, go ahead.
So we literally moved Dan in with Mark's parents yesterday,
Okay.
so that he's gonna kind of care for them while
Yeah.
going to school, and so, it's kind of.
Yeah. The widow who has children and grandchildren, the church does not have responsibility for them. Okay? That responsibility should be taken over by her children and grandchildren. So if you are a young person and you have grandparents, you have parents, you have a responsibility towards them. I know that the culture kind of is very dismissive of some of these things, but if your parents have taken the trouble to invest in you, someday when they are retired, their income has gone down, possibly, you have a responsibility to take care of them. All right? Any concerns?
Not a concern. It's interesting. It's those children are to honor their parent, which that's one of the big 10, and to honor them. But then it's added in there, and that's honoring, once again, the same kind of honor to God.
Yeah.
And I think of Ephesians where there's that, the man is accountable to God, and it continues down,
Yes. So, it's all a matter of planning. Don't only think about yourself and your family, but think about your parents and grandparents as you work. And maybe when there's time, we'll even talk about insurance, life insurance, for instance. I think in this country, funerals are a big thing. 10,000, 8,000, whatever. So if somebody is nearing that, probably it might be prudent to think along those lines. And it's a matter of just consistently setting us a little aside, All right. I saw Emmanuel.
Yeah, before we move to verse 3 of the chapter, I see understood some of the stuff in verse 1 and 2.
Verse 1 and 2?
I have a question for you.
You want to go back to verse 1 and 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, who can you review? Is it a believer or a believer?
We are talking about the church, so obviously believers. Yes.
So, do you see that there was like a problem that was stopped or not?
I think last week we said that these are general principles that we are learning. So depending on what happens, it may not, he uses the word rebuke, but if we don't know, we can't put a hand or finger on specific events. But assuming somebody is wrong, that somebody has committed a sin, somebody has had a problem, let's say in speech, okay, the elders or even another Christian has a responsibility to correct the person. So we are talking about correction here. All right? And it's a general principle. Paul doesn't mention specific things, no. So we are talking about the principle of correcting people. All right? Okay, let's move on. We can talk after we are done. So verse 4, the second group of widows, those who have a family, it's their children and grandchildren. It's not just children, but the grandchildren also can help, all right? Good. And one person I was listening to was saying that sometimes for the older people, they just need somebody to be driving them around. I'm going to Walmart, just join me, So consider that if maybe you are a spouse and your husband's parents are, especially the mothers, take them in, drive them around, so that they can be active and things like that. All right, take them in. So look at verse number 6. There's a third group. And which is that group? Anybody can tell? Verse number 6, which third group of widows? How would you describe them?
Unbeliever. Sounds like she's self-indulgent.
Yes.
And it goes back to the quote that you and I talked about, dead even while she's
Now look at the terms, Emmanuel.
Okay, can you please tell us like the history, what was going on in the church with the widows?
It will be very difficult because we are not given the context. But from what we are reading, okay, we can surmise that there are some people who are living a particular lifestyle. Okay, so let's say the verse number, the third group. Okay, the widow living in worldly pleasure. Now, do you think this person is a Christian or not? Is it possible for a Christian to live in worldly pleasure? And for a widow, what might lead to a widow living in sinful pleasure?
The same thing that would lead any of us to live in worldly pleasure, just like the older man here who needs rebuking. Occasionally we stray or backslide or.
Yeah. Yes. Let me give you an example. When I was in California, a couple that I was very close to, the wife lost the brother who was around 67 years, but he wasn't a Christian. He and his wife were not Christians, but I met him because they invited me frequently for family gatherings, Thanksgiving, July 4th, and all of that. So I met him, very nice man, but he wasn't a Christian. And so I think a year after I moved there, the man died. And when Doreen, that's my friend, and the husband told me, he said, look, Bennett, the wife is just distraught. Because he said they did everything together. So when the man died out because of stroke, he had been drinking, so it took its toll on him. And he died I think when he was hospitalized, within a week, he was gone. And the wife was just distraught because she was relatively young and the man was everything to her. And she just took to drinking. And Doreen and Pat said, look, we've invited them so many times to church, but they would never come. So what I'm saying is that sometimes, as a result of the grief, some people just let their lives just degenerate into something else. So it's possible that some of these widows were having a hard time, okay? But whatever the situation may be, it's possible that for a Christian to also fall in sin. So that is why the gospel needs to be constantly preached. Okay. Any comments, thoughts on that? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think that a widow and really any other single person would have a special temptation, like a stronger temptation to be selfish.
Yes.
Because there wouldn't necessarily be the family that would be the sanctifying effect that they would have to be thinking about and doing stuff for.
Yeah. In some instances, I believe some of you who are in the medical field will attest to this. Some even begin to lose their faculties. And they constantly need to be reminded about so many. And some, I tell you, some can really be nasty. Even to those who are helping them. You see. So, such a person needs to be preached to. She needs the gospel. And and the church has no responsibility to take care of such an one. Paul mentions it there. She ought not to be supported. All right?
Were they Christian or not?
Were they Christian or not? We are saying that we are not too sure here, but we can surmise that once they are mentioned, possibly they are in the church. Remember, every person who comes to church is not necessarily a Christian. Yes. But at least when you show your fruits by your commitment and faithfulness and all of that, at least we can, to a large extent, say that a person is a Christian. Okay? But it's not everybody who walks into the church who is a Christian. In fact, if you've been to our prayer meetings, we've been praying for people who are even frequent visitors. For frequent visitors, we pray that, some way, somehow, they make that commitment. Okay? So sometimes people come in, they are not really members, but they are regular visitors, all right? Until your name comes onto the church roll, because we'll look at another group where it says those who have been enrolled. So it means if you are a member of a local church, you should be enrolled. We should have you on the register. And that goes out to all of us. In my previous church in Ghana, if you are not a church member and you have a funeral, the church can only come in grace. But when you are a member, the church is obligated to come in. All right? Okay. So, look at verse 7. As he's mentioning the groups, he pauses and then reminds Timothy to do what? Look at what he says in verse 7. What does he say?
Command these things as well, so they may be with you, so they may be without reproach.
Look at the term here, command. So Paul is serious. Command. You get it? All right. So, verse 8, we need to take responsibility and we need to plan ahead, all right, so that we can be in a position to provide. It's so sad when sometimes family members, you see parents struggling and the children don't care. Have you observed that before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Parents are struggling and the children don't care. Not even one. Sometimes. All right. So look at verse number 9. And now the fourth group. Which group is that? The fourth group.
She's a member of the church.
Yes.
And younger.
Yes. So here, those who are enrolled. And who are those enrolled? Those who are 60 years and above. The widows. We are talking about the widows here. And what it tells us is that even in the first century, a kind of office had been provided to cater for such ones. And they must be faithful people. And then he says there should be a one-man woman. Okay? It should be a one, just like we saw in the elders and the deacons, where it says a one-woman man. Here it says it should be a one-man woman. So what does it tell you? What does it tell you concerning widows?
She's a member of the church. She's a Christian. She's
yes,
faithful. Yes.
But it's possible that there's something there. Some widows are prone to. Are you getting it?
Prone to promiscuity.
Yes.
Is that what you're looking
yes. Who may have, So the person who qualifies should be a one-man woman. Okay, right. So we should create a system to take care of such people. They should be at least 60 years old. Okay, so we've seen those who are truly widows. Then we've seen those who have a family, children and grandchildren. If they have a family, the children and grandchildren should take care of them. Shouldn't be the church's responsibility. Then we have the widow who is living in worldly pleasure, self-indulgent, okay, wild lifestyle. She needs to be witnessed to. She needs to hear the gospel. She ought not to be supported. Then number 4, we have those who are enrolled, those on the church's roster, who must be at least 60 years. Okay, we should create an office to support such ones. All right. Now let's go to, oh yes, ma'am.
So what's the difference between the true widows, and then the widows that are enrolled?
I suspect that there can be some overlap.
Okay.
Yes, I suspect that there will be some kind of overlap.
Why was Paul so critical about the widow?
Why was he?
Yeah.
Now, usually, even now, okay, widows, in most cultures, even in Africa, I'm sure, even your country, women usually are the ones who don't work, and the man is supposed to be going back and forth, okay, working and taking care of the family. So when the man dies, everything comes to a standstill for a lot of women who may be working, but the money is not enough, or some may not even be working at all. So if you belong to a local church, it's the church's responsibility, and you are faithful, it's the responsibility of the church to take care of you. Okay, but if you have children who are working and capable of taking care of you, they should, all right?
So now you see the problem.
What problem?
The problem in that verse is why Paul was so critical. It was the culture.
He's not critical. He's setting parameters. He's giving principles, okay? So that it will guide a young preacher. Okay.
So there was a system in the church
Uh-huh.
that the church took care of all the widows,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
So the Paul was like, no, that's like a burden to the church. So make it easy for the church
Uh-huh.
to operate
Uh-huh.
faithfully.
Uh-huh.
That's why he was trying to break it down so that the local church will understand
Uh-huh.
that we should be under the church.
Mm-hmm. And those who should not.
Do not.
Yes.
So now you see the problem.
What problem?
There was an issue in the church that the members did like bring all in all, whatever age you are, and as long as you are a widow,
Mm-hmm.
or you're a widow, so you can be under the church program.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul was like, no, it shouldn't be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Paul was like trying to break it down so that they can really understand what was going on in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because Paul was trying to solve the problem
Mm-hmm.
that local church.
Mm-hmm.
So now you see the background. You see like the story now.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was trying to say. So.
You've got it? Okay, good. Right. So verse number 11, there's another category of women, of widows. Who are they? The younger widows. Now, what should the church do with the younger widows? Look at the verses there, 11 following. Should the church take responsibility for them? No. What are the reasons Paul gives there?
Because they're still going to have a drive to start that.
Yes.
What I see.
Yeah. From how he describes them there, he says they have the potential to be idle, busybodies, gossips, and all of that. So what is he prescribing? Where possible, they should marry. They should remarry. If they lost their husbands, they should find somebody to marry. But the question is, in most cultures, it is not women who marry men. It is men who go for these people, all right? So I ask you, what do we do with such women when the men are not coming forward? Emmanuel, today you are on fire. Oh, the subject is very interesting for you. Go ahead, yeah.
So it doesn't seem that way according to the Bible. Like if you done it that way, like men will not come for widows, it doesn't like not the picture Paul is trying to say here. It's like the way the church was taking care of widows, like they put them in a corner that they cannot even think of that. Like the church was taking care of them. So there's no need for them to go and get married, right? So Paul was trying to say, let them go. Let them do. If they want to go and marry again, let them go and marry if they're young. If they're not young, they're not going to get it. So, so it's not like the way like men are not coming from the women.
No, I think do you understand what he's saying?
I missed
You missed that. Oh, you just. I think we are saying the same thing, okay? But I'm just trying to expound on what we've read here. That ideally, a woman cannot just get up and say, I have to marry at all costs. It is a man who comes for you. Okay, so we can surmise that, in a local church, okay, the young men, for instance, if who are single, should also be on the lookout for such women. If, all right, so that kind of, you look for a wife amongst the congregation, something like that. So he says that such women, okay, should try and then marry to avoid being all over the place. When you are idle, instead of taking care of a family and children and cooking and things like that, which will take your time, you shouldn't be going into homes and being a busybody. In fact, it's not the only place, but that kind of attitude is. Yes, sir.
I got a question regarding verse 14.
Okay.
The young widow.
Yes.
So I would have every woman married.
Yes.
Now, I think about if she married and didn't bear children, there'd be no one to take care of her at age 60.
Yeah.
But she no longer qualified, if I'm hearing you right, to be a one-man woman. She had two men.
I disagree. Oh, go ahead.
Well-
I've been talking a lot. You.
Please go ahead.
I'm not
Yeah.
talking one or two men at a time, just a blanket, one man, woman, and a blanket, one woman, man. You see, once, and we can put criterion on there that, well, she didn't get divorced, he died.
Yeah.
That's extra words to what I'm saying. I'm trying to understand.
These are general
Principles,
principles and
yeah.
an ideal.
Yeah.
And so Paul is instructing Timothy as he's a pastor. These are the general principles.
Mhm.
And each situation you have to look at and take other biblical
Mhm.
principles, which
Mhm.
other biblical principles are
Mhm.
that, like Elizabeth Elliot was married 3 times. Her
Mhm.
first 2 husbands
Mhm.
died. You know, I mean, and that was,
Yeah,
that's not
not
her
really.
fault. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. You wouldn't, you know, so you have to take other biblical principles. This is just like, okay, here's
Yeah.
a situation. You don't want someone who's been divorced or serial with all these different guys. If she's been true to her husband at the
Mhm.
time, I think that she fits in this.
Yeah.
He can't address every possible situation for everyone. So these are ideals.
Mhm.
So when you have this situation, generally do this.
Mhm.
If there's information to add, okay, we take other principles and,
Yeah.
and you know, put it in there and figure it out. It won't
Yeah.
violate.
Yeah. Kevin, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this usage here, just like in the qualifications of elders, has to do with total devotion
Yeah.
to the person who you're married to.
Mhm.
To say that it implies divorce is to read into the passage.
Yeah.
Paul talks about divorce and remarriage in Corinthians.
Mhm.
These are letters that are later in Paul's ministry. If he was referring to divorce, why would he not have mentioned that here
Yeah.
in talking about the qualifications?
Yeah.
So I think it's not really referring to what has happened in anyone's past, but
Mhm.
what's happening currently.
Yeah.
You know, just like when you talk about the qualification of elders,
Mhm.
you know, if you talk about, if we say that Paul's referring to divorce there, which is a past act, why when he's talking about not being addicted to much wine, then we would have to imply there that a person who has been an alcoholic in the past would not be able to be qualified as an elder. So I don't think that Paul's really referring to a past action or past behavior. He's talking about the present reality of how a person should be conducting themselves.
Yeah.
And so when he uses this, as he does in relation to elders, he's talking about total devotion. How is this person conducting themselves in their relationship or in their current situation? Are they totally devoted? So I think that's more, I think, a better interpretation of that.
Yeah. In fact, I think like what Kevin is saying, you remember when we spoke about the qualifications of elders and deacons, Paul didn't mention a single person. But we know from history, even Timothy, we are not told was really married. Okay, even Paul himself, when C.H. Spurgeon became a preacher, just a young man until he married in latter years. So we are looking at the general principles. Sometimes I understand that it's just unfortunate that some women, for some reason, they lose their husband, one, lose number two, and then, you know, yes, it happens. There are so many examples. It's so unfortunate. You see, we are talking about people who are at least 60 years. We have widows who are in their 30s, in their 40s. Okay, doesn't mean they don't, you know. Yes. So these are general principles. But
I apologize.
Oh, no, you
No,
don't.
my question was misinterpreted by mass.
Oh.
And I apologize.
Oh, maybe, okay, it didn't come out well? Right. Right. So, we've seen these 5 groups, and I want us to spend the last bit just looking at, look behind your paper. Okay, let's quickly go through the questions there based on what we've discussed. Look at the research and discussion. 1, should the church be supporting younger widows with no family who desire to marry, but there's no one asking them? I think we've answered that already, right? Okay, let's go to number 2. Do you agree or disagree? The many convalescent homes in America reflect our lack of concern for the aged. Do you agree or disagree?
Yes.
Number 2. These are government institutions, right? And yeah, some are private. Okay. Do you agree that many convalescent homes in America reflect our lack of concern for the aged? Generally speaking, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I worked in a nursing home for 3.5 years, and we had people that the family brought them, and they never came back.
They never set foot there.
We had one lady, a hat showed up once, but we didn't see anyone walk in, but that was it.
Yeah.
And then you have the others that this is a way to take care of their parents, and they're there every day, and they're looking over their care, they're finding out about their meal plans, and the whole thing. So it can be used a proper way, but then it's abused, and it does reflect how we look at the elderly.
Yeah. Right. So we should do better. If you have a relative, you need to make sure that you are, frequenting the place as much as you can, making sure that you care. You see, who knows? Someday what you do to your parents, your children will do to you. It might even be worse. All right? That's how life is. All right. Number 3, it's a living arrangement for aged parents, always in the best interest of all parties concerned. Why or why not?
Whenever you have always in the question.
Yeah.
I was going to say something earlier about this, but I think this would be a good time. I think even unbelievers see this principle in effect that you're to care for your parents. My sister and brother aren't believers, but when my dad died, my sister said, we can bring my mom in, and so mom's living with them. They don't know 1 Timothy. They don't know this biblical principle, but it's still there that they should take care of their parents. And it goes all the way back to Exodus 20. It's honoring your parents if you can do that. Yeah. I agree. Always, there's logistics that don't work out. You may live 200 miles from your parents, and it's hard to move them and all that. But yeah, I think when you can.
Yeah. I remember one case where, and the mom, who was, I think she was like 86 or something like that, she was just adamant she didn't want to live with anybody. But she was falling periodically, and the daughter was concerned. So eventually, my friends, Doreen and the husband, they made arrangements for their younger brother to go and live with the mom. I think when I moved here, she passed a year or two later. So there are some elderly people who are very stubborn. They want to live by themselves. But you who are concerned, you still have to make the effort to, Some try to bring them closer, so that they can always, right? So these are things, I'm sure some of you are thinking, oh, this is far-reaching, but you never know. You never know. So you should be considering these things as you discuss them. All right, number 4. Why do you think more elderly people are not involved in actively ministering in the local church? This question comes from the verse which says that the widows, some were hospitable, serving here, serving there, serving in the church. So why do you think that a lot of elderly people are not actively ministering in the local church? Yes, ma'am.
I think 2 reasons. Sometimes it is hard and they just don't have the energy. But I think sometimes too, I think of my sister-in-law who has 4 teenage daughters, and she kept trying to be involved in mentoring these girls and discipling them. And the youth pastor, the young guy, wanted someone hip and young. You know what I mean? So he kept pushing her away, like she wanted to go to counselor. Camp counselor for she wanted to invite girls to just mentor them. And it was, again, the pastor and stuff that kind of kept her out because she wasn't, I guess, hip enough. They wanted someone in their 20s to really reach the youth as opposed to wisdom, which reminds me of Rehoboam in scripture. It's like, hold on a minute, you're not really, thinking like someone who's older and wiser would do a better job, but she was kept out. So I think it's both sides.
Yeah. right? In the Church of Jesus Christ, everybody has a role to play. It doesn't matter your age. Sometimes it's just a matter of, years ago, in Awana, there was a 90-year-old woman who volunteered to play the organ for the children every week. If you know Awana is very, very, it's like a regime. Oh yes, it's like a regime. So for this 90-year-old woman to volunteer to play the organ for the kids every week, amazing, 90-year-old woman. That takes a lot of,
There's something about that wisdom too. As a kid, I remember in the youth, Mary Bell Smith. Now, I pictured her around 250 years old because I was about this tall. But I remember, here I am 54 years later, she'd been gone probably nearly 40 years.
Yeah.
But I still remember Mary Bell Smith.
Yeah.
And what a pillar that she is in my life. Just, she didn't teach theology or anything like that, but there was that example. And so sometimes, I don't think that they are involved because of their health situation or their availability. But should they? Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I think kind of piggybacking off of what Harold said, I think we as younger women have responsibility as well, because I think when older women are not sought out, they maybe don't know how much they have to offer. But I know that I personally benefited a lot from seeking out the wisdom and counsel of older women in the church. So I think that younger women in the church have a responsibility to reach out and form these relationships as well.
Yeah.
And give the older women that opportunity.
Yeah. And what she said brings to mind the fact that, you need to be faithful. You need to be available. You need to be teachable. These three words, fact, these are the people God uses. Faithful, available, teachable. And if you have these qualities, you can be of service in the church of Jesus Christ. Faithful, available, teachable. It doesn't matter your age. All right? Let me just end by my father all my siblings are saved. My mother was saved. In fact, when I started attending Sunday school, a friend invited me. I brought my two sisters along. We became saved. Then we started attending. Then my mom, who is Catholic, saw that we were committed to the Baptist church. And then she came along. So the elders started coming to our church to spend time with us, counsel us and all of that. But my father never. He came to church a couple of times, but he never settled. So when he passed, Pastor said, Bennet, you know the rules. We cannot bring your father to the church and lay him in state because he's not a member of the church. But because of you and your sisters and your mother, we would come to your house, do the funeral, to give us an opportunity to preach to the audience. And we'll take care of some things, But I learned through that experience. Sometimes people don't care about the church. But I tell you, in those difficult moments, you will need the church. You will need the church. And so all of us have a responsibility to make sure that our local church is thriving. I don't think an announcement should come that we need volunteers. No. We have to step up. Step up. If you can't teach, you can just encourage somebody. Just take the children, sit by a young person, mentor the person, encourage. Just greeting people. I told you when Ray passed, I was so sad because Ray would always be at the door. When Bennet, how is this? How is that? He was smiling. Time is gone. We'll continue, Lord willing, next week. Let's pray. Father, what a blessing it is to fellowship around your holy word. Lord, continue to Give us grace. Help us, O God, even to continue to serve you acceptably and reverently in this present age. Lord, help us to be a blessing even to our fellow Christians. We pray for all of this in Jesus' name.